Hello everyone, and welcome to the 63rd episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Antonio Salieri from Amadeus. A self-described mediocrity, Salieri serves as more of a covert antagonist than an outright villain, one whose actions and the intent behind them remain a secret, known only to a select few throughout this film. A man with a promising career, well on his way to becoming the great composer he always dreamed of, whose mind was unfortunately infected by the virulent poison that is envy. I'm sure many of you are already aware, but for those of you who aren't, know that this film is essentially a fantasy, and the majority of the events that transpire within aren't true at all to reality. And though there is some truth to be found in various scenes in this quasi-historical epic, the lives of the characters we find within are heavily fictionalized, and the Salieri we see in this film is far and away from being a direct representation of his real-world counterpart. It's for this reason that it wouldn't make much sense to cover both this Salieri and the real one, and I won't be doing so in this video. If you'd like to know which events and components of these characters are true to reality, I'll leave a link on the topic in the description of this video. With that aside, let's first talk about our sponsor for this video, Squarespace, before we start talking about Salieri. Squarespace is the premier service in the industry when it comes to creating your own website. The creation process is incredibly simple and interactive, and it won't take you much time to get comfortable with all that Squarespace has to offer. They have great features like members areas, which is a section of your website that you can use to provide exclusive content to your target audience. You can display any projects or videos in any section of your site with the Portfolio and Galleries feature and Video Blocks feature, respectively, giving you the ability to further customize your site with content that you've produced yourself. Square also makes buying a domain an easy process, and getting the handle that you'd like is as simple as pressing a few buttons. I've already started setting up my own site, and there will be a lot of great things to find there once it's ready to go, and I couldn't have done it any better without the help of Squarespace, because Squarespace really is the best solution for building a website. And if you're interested in getting started on your own creation, head to squarespace.com now to begin setting up your site. And when you're ready to launch, make sure you go to squarespace.com/thevioleye to save 10% off your first purchase of a domain. Thank you, Squarespace, for sponsoring this video. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Salieri was born in Italy in the mid-18th century, the son of a father who, unfortunately for the young Salieri, had little appreciation for the musical arts. Salieri wanted to be a great composer, but it would seem that his father wouldn't even allow the young man to pick up an instrument. Due to his age, there was little that young Salieri could do but acquiesce to his father's wishes, so he turned to the only source of help he had in this situation, God, praying to God for a miracle, one that would enable him to become a world-renowned composer whose name would endure for all time. Salieri was given this miracle in the form of his father's death, or at least so he calls it, as claiming your father's death is a miracle simply because he wouldn't allow you to practice music doesn't really seem to qualify as a miracle. In exchange for God granting him this so-called miracle, Salieri promised that he would be industrious and chaste, and from this moment on, recognizing his father's death as the miracle he so desired, he remained a hard-working and abstinent man, eventually gaining some of the fame and recognition he so desired, finding himself in the employ of the Austrian emperor, the court composer, to a musical king who allowed him room to flourish and grow in a world he never dreamed he would have been able to be a part of. And in this position as court composer, Salieri would have access to all the luxuries available to someone so close to royalty, like fine dining, clothing, and housing that was fit enough for those born of the highest birth. In his adulthood, Salieri appears to us as a man reserved, one who seems to prefer observation to conversation. When he does speak, he's witty, charming, and elegant, and he displays the manners expected of a gentleman of his station and the intelligence of a man who has long studied his craft. His mannerisms reflect both his manners and the reservation present in his personality, as we find a man whose back is straight, his expressions limited, and his hands kept close to his person. Now, by all accounts, Salieri had made his dream a reality, or rather, God had made his dream a reality. Religion is a central component in the story of Salieri. Already a pious man in his youth, the granting of his miraculous prayer made Salieri's faith expand tenfold, but his devotion to and faith in God goes far beyond gratitude. For Salieri, God is in everything. God is in the music he composes, the fortune he gains, and every other aspect of his life. From the breath he draws each day to the nourishment that sustains his lifeblood, God rules everything in Salieri's life and the world. These beliefs are a boon for Salieri in that it provides him with a sense of security and purpose through God. But, as we soon learn once he encounters Mozart for the first time, it can also be a curse. Salieri had admired Mozart from afar ever since he was a young boy, hearing tales of the child prodigy gallivanting around Europe, playing for kings and popes, a musical genius who was partially afforded this talent through the good graces of his father, something the young Salieri envied highly. However, upon meeting his idol for the first time in his adulthood, he found that the musical genius he had all but worshipped was nothing more than a silly, foolish, and lecherous youth. For Salieri, this caused him a great amount of confusion. According to Salieri, God is in everything in this world, and if that's the case, how could God choose this raucous, sinful young man to be the instrument from which he would grace the world with the purest and most divine music? Salieri had quite literally given his life to God, offered his devotion and dedication to the highest entity in the universe as thanks for the gifts that he had given him. And in return, Salieri believed that a virtuous man like him deserved every musical blessing that the Lord could provide for him. And up until hearing Mozart's music for the first time, he believed that he had received just that. But no, now that he's been presented with the wonder that was the genius of Mozart, he could only stand awestruck as he realized that this man's work was God's voice brought to the earthly plane, not his, which puzzled him to no end. So for a short time, he assumed that the piece he heard had to be a fluke, a lucky composition, a one-off, and nothing to be taken seriously. However, upon meeting him once again at the palace of the emperor, Salieri found that not only was that piece no fluke, but that Mozart was a genius far beyond anything that he could have imagined. Forced to stand and watch as Mozart transformed a piece Salieri had wrote for him that he believed, like all things, had come to him with the help of God, we see both awe and concern creep onto his face as this little tune he had worked on becomes nothing short of a masterpiece at the hands of this young buffoon. Now Salieri might have been able to bear this new heart-wrenching reality he's found himself in. He wouldn't have liked it, but what was he to do? Mozart was more talented than he, and that's just the way things were. But there are two things working against Salieri here. The first is who Mozart is, a spoiled, impetuous brat who has no respect, no honor, and no piety, a little man who expels ear-grating laughter and gives in to his carnal desires. If Mozart had been more respectable, Salieri may have been able to keep Mozart as an idol and valued colleague, rather than viewing him as an upstart child, undeserving of the talent that's been given to him. The second thing working against him comes in the form of hurt feelings from an occurrence that not many people are capable of taking in stride. Mozart sleeping with the woman Salieri had loved. Now Mozart, or Caterina, can hardly be blamed here for their romantic encounter. It's not as if Caterina had promised herself to Salieri, and Mozart had no way of knowing that Salieri was in love with her, and it would seem neither did she. A man or woman who doesn't make their intentions known to their love interest can't expect them to remain dedicated to them without knowing that they should. But nonetheless, the pain is still the same. And for Salieri, this pain is amplified by the ill feelings he already housed towards Mozart. And as he explains later in his life to Father Vogler, this is where, for the first time in his life, he began to have violent thoughts. Well, unless you count him chalking up his father's death as a miracle, as violent. Now, rather than praying to God to endow him with the musical talents he so craved, his prayers turned towards ridding Vienna of Mozart, both for revenge against him for what he's done, as well as to rid himself of the man who he believed was stealing all of his thunder. He found the opportunity to exact his revenge soon after he had been betrayed by Mozart in the form of Mozart's wife, who, in her desperation, sought help from Salieri in obtaining a job for the bankrupt Mozart. A cry for help that he meets with a proposition of adultery, striking back at Mozart sexually, just as Mozart had to him. Before this moment, Salieri prayed that God would instill within him one piece of true music, so he might gain the satisfaction he desperately needed from his work, satisfaction that might erase the need to exact his terrible revenge against his newfound foe, saving him from what he feels he must do. This piece of music would never come. But regardless, when faced with stooping to the same level as the man he detested, Salieri found that he could not act on this horrid impulse, and instead chose to turn from this lecherous scheme in favor of continued attempts to undermine Mozart's career. From here on out, Salieri would dedicate himself not to the promise he had made to God so long ago, but to sabotaging every aspect of Mozart's life in an attempt to destroy him. No longer trusting in God, Salieri declares him his enemy, an enemy who unjustly endowed a lesser man with the talents that he believed that he deserved, that he had worked so hard for. And this is where the evil of Salieri begins. Unbeknownst to Mozart, he starts to covertly move against him in any way that he can. He persuades the emperor to deny Mozart a position as teacher to his niece, ensuring that his continued lack of pupils will leave him perpetually destitute. He hires a maid to spy on Mozart in order to learn his secrets, so he might better undermine him. Once he learns of the opera that Mozart is writing, he makes sure that the emperor becomes aware of the nature of this opera, and though the emperor approves it, Salieri still ensures that it's only shown a few times in the theater, an action he takes with every other concert and opera that Mozart puts on. But no action that Salieri takes is as devious as his plot to see Mozart dead. Caught between his deep admiration for the man's work and his unending hatred for his person, Salieri finds a way to honor and dishonor this man and God all at once. Undercover, he commissions a requiem for Mozart, a requiem that he plans to pass off as his own, a requiem that he plans to have played at the funeral of Mozart once he has killed him. With this plan, Salieri meant to all at once finally obtain a piece of true music with his name attached to it, and gain his revenge against the god who he felt had abandoned him in favor of the foolish instrument he had chosen instead, keeping Mozart in financial ruin due to his actions. The man who was already terrible when it came to managing his finances and vices falls further and further into decay, his alcoholism growing as his wallet becomes lighter and lighter. The pressures of trying to keep his head above water while fighting his impulses, stretching him thin to the point where he begins to descend into madness, and his health into the gutter, feigning friendship and compassion when Mozart falls ill during one of his performances. Salieri absconds with him back to his apartment to take care of him, and once there, he's given the perfect opportunity he needs to force Mozart into finishing his requiem, handing him a purse filled with money he earned from the night's performance, and passing it off as payment from the mysterious man in black. Salieri tells Mozart that he must finish this requiem before tomorrow night if he wishes to earn 100 ducats, money enough that Mozart desperately needs. So, the pair spend the night putting to paper the symphonic masterpiece that lies within Mozart's mind, writing the song that will soon be played at the funeral of one of the greatest musical geniuses to ever live. And there to help him write it is his veritable undertaker, the man responsible for pushing this man to the very brink of death. When the morning breaks and his wife returns, young Mozart succumbs to his illnesses, and with his death comes something that Salieri likely imagined he wouldn't feel at this moment, the deepest regret. There, lying dead in his bed, was the man he had idolized in his youth, the man he had come to hate like no other in his life, the man who he envied, and yes, even loved to the point of awe-inspired admiration of every note he had ever put to paper. This is the madness of Antonio Salieri, a madness that he attributes to the entity he has always attributed everything to, God. It was not Salieri who killed Mozart. No, that was God. Just as God had granted him his miracle when he was younger and abandoned him as an adult, God was the one who let his chosen be outdone by Salieri. God forced Salieri's hand and caused the destruction of Mozart. And God was the one who placed love for Mozart in the heart of Salieri, a love that would bring him torment and torture for 32 years as he was left to wallow in his regret, to the point where the pain of what he had done became unbearable, nearly ending his life before a servant saved him from a bloody death. Who knows what became of Salieri after he finished regaling Father Vogler with his tale of envious sabotage and conniving murder, but I'm sure he lived the rest of his days just as he had lived the last 32 years of his life, miserable and alone, with few left to remember who he was, or the work that he had completed in life. A man whose dark desire to undermine the work of one greater than him left him the very thing he had feared he would become, a footnote in the history of our species. And at this end, who was Antonio Salieri? He was a boy who dreamed of reaching the height of fame in the arts, a boy who had a deep connection to music that so few of us have the privilege of experiencing, one where the notes coursed through every fiber of his being to deliver ecstasy through the understanding he gained from every press of a key and vibration of a string. This young boy would go on to develop himself into a talented musician and composer, reaching high and earning himself a position in the court of an emperor, a position that few can claim to have gained and many would kill to have. However, the dream he had that was made a reality was shattered upon meeting a boy he had idolized in his youth, a hedonistic heretic of a boy who he believed God had chosen to represent him musically on earth rather than the pious industrious, and ever faithful Salieri. Driven mad with envy and confliction, Salieri set to work, ruining the life of a man who he greatly admired, one that he in truth likely loved as a colleague and a friend. But love and admiration are often no match for hatred and jealousy, and so Salieri forsook his tender emotions and his faith in God in favor of vengeance, a vengeance that he would exact slowly and painfully upon the unsuspecting Mozart. And though he didn't strike the killing blow, Salieri provided the poison that would seal this man's fate, condemning him to die, with Mozart being none the wiser. Salieri was a dignified, ambitious, and mild-mannered man, one who showed great promise in the musical arts, and though he may have never ascended to the heights of Mozart, he was well on the path to making a name for himself, like he always dreamed of doing. But hatred and envy can betray any of us, and unfortunately for Salieri and Mozart, he chose to abandon all that he believed in favor of exacting revenge against the man he admired and the God he thought had left him, ultimately living out the rest of his days, mired in a pit of despair of his own making, a man who irrevocably damaged his life and another's with his own evil. Thank you all for tuning into this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Salieri? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured in a future episode while you're at it. If you liked this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, and to my patrons, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and Reddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.